Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank everyone for coming today, especially Bishop Libasci. When the debate over the federal Constitution was being conducted before the public, many conditioned their support on promises of a Bill of Rights. Others thought it was unnecessary because they said this federal government of ours will be a government of limited powers. So saying what rights it can't violate ignores the fact that it can only do what is expressly stated in the Constitution and nothing more. How fortunate we are that those requiring a Bill of Rights prevail. But once again, we turn to the protection it affords us against a presidential administration that has chosen to violate our rights and exceed its enumerated powers. While today's press conference is about the Obama administration's policy on contraception, I'd like to make 2 points clear about what we're not talking about today. First of all, we're not talking about the relative merits of contraception or sterilization, or even whether or not insurers choose to offer coverage for these services in their policies. Second, we're not here today to discuss the Catholic Church policy on contraception, sterilization, or other aspects of the Church's teachings or beliefs. What we are here today to discuss is the fundamentally unconstitutional and deeply flawed law known as ObamaCare, and one more of that law's unexpected consequences that only now are beginning to be fully grasped. In this particular case, we are seeing that the Catholic Church, which has long held that contraception violates its teachings, will now have its affiliated organizations, such as hospitals, colleges, and charitable groups, be forced to purchase health insurance policies that cover contraception and chemical abortions. Whether these groups should be forced to buy this coverage directly, as was included in the original Obamacare regulation, or indirectly, as was indicated by the accounting gimmick that the Obama administration announced Friday, the idea that a religious group would be compelled to buy a service that it finds both morally repugnant and an express renunciation of its beliefs is both contrary to our values and unconstitutional. However, this is the logical byproduct of passing a law that actively contemplated having the federal government take over health care policies nationally. Without Obamacare that mandates the federal government will set these guidelines for insurance coverage, this misguided policy never would have happened. Without a mandate that required all Americans were forced to buy health insurance, it's unlikely the federal government would ever have attempted this level of overreach. The issue we face today is the horribly ill-advised policy to force the Catholic Church to buy insurance coverage for services that contradicts its teachings. But the underlying policy is the disastrous law that led to this policy. This is just one more reason why so many of us are deeply disappointed that Governor Lynch and Attorney General Delaney have chosen to block New Hampshire from joining the 28 other states that have sued to throw out Obamacare, and Democratic gubernatorial candidates such as Jacqueline Silly have chosen to support that failure to protect New Hampshire citizens. They have turned a state that should be a leading on this issue into a follower, and have led people nationally to believe our state does not oppose this foolish, overreaching law, which we certainly do. Sending this message now is critical because this current episode of federal anti-religious overreach is just the first of what will undoubtedly be many new regulations that will stifle competition, interfere with long-standing state policies, and potentially run afoul of our religious freedoms. For this reason, I call on the Governor and Attorney General once again to make New Hampshire the 29th state and join the Obamacare lawsuits immediately. We have taken several steps at the state level. We passed a law last year making it illegal to require that anyone purchase health care. This House has also passed a law this year that begins to tackle the issues of scaling back insurance mandates, and it is a good first step. I know that several legislators, led by Representative Manous and Bergevin, are working to put a religious exemption into our insurance mandate laws relative to contraception. At the same time, the House is also working to take further steps to block this destructive federal law, including ending the implementation of Obamacare health insurance exchanges. Obviously, our best hope is that the U.S. Supreme Court will toss out this law and we can begin to start working on true health care reform that uses the strength of the free market and what the states have learned to do and not to do, as well as one that respects religious beliefs. With that, I will turn to Congressman Bass.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm a pro-choice Republican. I'm here because I think what the administration is proposing to do is the tip of the iceberg. Those of you who are seniors who are on Medicare Advantage know that the new health care law is going to eliminate that. Those of you who have tried to buy over-the-counter drugs through your health savings account are going to soon discover that you can't do that. And now the Secretary of Health and Human Services is beginning a rulemaking process with a very highly controversial rule that will basically, in the end, have you, as a consumer, being told by a federal bureaucrat what you can buy, you're covered, what you pay for, what you can get, what you can't get. This is not in the tradition of health care insurance in this nation. The bill that was passed a year and a half ago, or 2 years ago now, was over 1,000 pages long. To date, over 10,000 pages of rules have been written in an effort to implement this law. Its very constitutionality is being questioned in the highest court of the land. And now, we've gotten a taste of what it's like to have Washington make decisions for you in your health care plan. I support the resolution that's being considered by the New Hampshire House and is the recipient of it at such time as it passes and is sent on to me. I will support legislation, if introduced, which would rescind this misguided rule from the Department of Health and Human Services. For me, it's not about contraceptive services, it's about choice. And I'm pro-choice. And I think if the Catholic Church or any other religious organization chooses to offer a different kind of health plan, they should be able to do so. And this so-called accommodation, where the health insurance companies pay for it, not the insurer, it's the same. But I'm not for the status quo in health care. For a long time, I've talked about universal deductibility, being able to buy health care policies across state lines, meaningful tort law reform, associated health care plans, a whole series of other proposals that make health care competitive, more available, less federally centralized, a completely different approach. If the U.S. Supreme Court chooses to overrule this new health care law, I hope that we can go back to ground zero and start with a plan that's really supported by the American people, that is understandable, that is predictable, won't be an economic drag, but will help reduce the cost of business in this, of employing people in this country. So I want to commend the legislature and its leadership for coming up with this resolution, which I think is timely and important. And with that, I will introduce the Bishop of the state of New Hampshire, Diocese of New Hampshire, Peter Libasci. Bishop.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I thank you for this opportunity to visit with you as bishop, as a religious leader here in the community. This is an issue that strikes at so many of us across all lines. And here I humbly ask that in the land of the free, we be allowed to be free, and in those issues where we stand as religious people, that our conscience, our responsibility, is able to be followed in this most important way. We realize that our work goes beyond the moments and confines of the altar, that we are in the community, in Catholic charities, in hospital work, distribution of food, shelters for the homeless. So many, many moments in the life of the community at large. But as people of faith, that which we do is always guided by the tenets that we have held for so many, many generations. At this time, I ask that all of our people of goodwill look carefully and support that which is in the best interest of that which gives life, that which sustains life. And knowing that life is indeed complicated, and the making of laws and rules and governing a society is complicated, I just ask that as we continue, that in the land of the free, we be allowed to be free to follow those dictates that are part of our catechism, part of our growth, part of our being as the people of God and good citizens. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaking is Sean Thomas. He's Director of Constituent Services for Congressman Frank Enta.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to read a short statement from Congressman Frank Enta. I add my voice today to those who are supporting House Resolution 29 and remain committed to working in Congress to protect the constitutional rights of Granite Staters and of all Americans. Two remarkable events in recent weeks have represented the best and the worst in public policy. It started when the federal government inserted itself into a place where it doesn't belong. The Obama administration dictated religious institutions that free contraceptives must be provided through their employee health insurance in complete disregard of personal religious beliefs. The reaction was immediate and intense. The outcry was so loud that this administration was forced to revise its original mandate. Although this matter is far from settled, the administration's change of direction shows that when the people speak in a strong, clear voice, the government is compelled to respond to their wishes. But this fight never should have been waged in the first place. If those who wield power in Washington had displayed a respect for, or even a basic understanding of the U.S. Constitution, they would have known that the Founding Fathers never envisioned the government imposing its view on any religious belief that disagrees with it. They would have done well to remember the words attributed to Thomas Jefferson, that government is best which governs the least, because its people discipline themselves. If the federal government can get away with forcing its will onto people in direct violation of their personal convictions, what will the government attempt next? I remain committed to reversing the many overreaches of federal authority we have seen in recent years and making sure it is returned to its proper scope and role. Thank you.
I want to acknowledge others that stand here with us today. There's Representative David Bates, Representative Andrew Manous, Kevin Smith, a gubernatorial candidate for the Republican Party, Jennifer Warren, who's a well-known Republican activist, and Representative Carl Sedell. And I want to introduce the Majority Leader, Representative D.J. Bettencourt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon. I am pleased to be the prime sponsor of this important resolution that is needed to push back against yet another misguided element of Obamacare. As with so much of Obamacare, it is free citizens, churches, and companies that are being coerced into a particular course of action when they were previously free to choose. And in this circumstance, it is the federal government that is doing the imposing. It is incredibly disappointing to see the Obama administration is distracted from focusing on our fragile economy. It is instead involving itself in social issues in which the federal government has no business. It was interesting to hear the President's Chief of Staff yesterday morning on Meet the Press roll out a straw man argument by saying that because some Catholic institutions receive government funds through Medicare and Medicaid, they should therefore be subject to these kinds of mandates. That argument is not only irrelevant to the point at issue here, but it is also false. Dollars from Washington do not each carry a rider, noting that their transmission deprives recipients of all constitutional protections. If they did, retired people could be politically silenced by virtue of their Social Security checks. Such a scenario is, of course, ridiculous. So why are hospitals and religious institutions any different? Moreover, no matter how hard the administration tries to spin the quote-unquote compromise they released last week, the reality is that it is merely a symbolic, tweaked plan that moves forward with trampling Americans' religious liberties while pretending to accommodate them. In truth, nothing of substance has changed from the original rule that was promulgated, that religious employers will be forced to provide services they may find morally objectionable. That is wrong, and we must stand up to the heavy-handedness of the White House. The American people are guaranteed the right to religious liberty by the First Amendment. That means protecting both the rights of religious institutions and those of individual citizens. It is a shame that the bishop needs to take important time away from his diocese to defend the doctrines of the Catholic faith from this unprovoked attack by the Obama administration. We are proud to stand united in defense of the First Amendment and New Hampshire's long and proud history of religious tolerance. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'd be glad to take questions.